Get him out of my building before my investors arrive." The words sliced through the marble ballroom with the cold precision of a knife wrapped in silk, and for a moment, every conversation inside the Sterling Foundation gala seemed to stop at once. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of wealthy guests dressed in black tuxedos and glittering evening gowns, while waiters carrying champagne trays froze mid-step beneath the golden lights. At the center of it all stood Caleb Ward, a quiet single father in a weathered brown jacket, holding the small hand of his 8-year-old daughter as two private security officers moved toward them through the crowd. No one there noticed the way Caleb calmly shifted Emma behind his right shoulder. No one noticed how his eyes quietly mapped every exit in the room before the guards even reached him. And absolutely no one in that ballroom knew the man they were about to humiliate once carried security clearances so powerful that entire governments had erased his name from public records. "Sir, we need you to leave," one of the guards said firmly. Caleb looked at him without anger, without fear, without even surprise. "Daddy," Emma whispered softly as her fingers tightened around his hand. Her tiny silver shoes reflected the ballroom lights while nervous tears gathered in her blue eyes. Caleb crouched slightly beside her, his voice low and calm like a steady fire during a winter storm. "It's okay, sweetheart. Stay close to me." Across the ballroom staircase stood Victoria Sterling herself, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, one of the most powerful tech companies in America. Her black designer gown shimmered beneath the lights as diamond earrings caught every movement of her head. Beautiful, controlled, untouchable. She stared at Caleb with the cold confidence of a woman used to removing problems with a single sentence. "That man was seen near the executive security offices," she announced sharply to the room. "And now confidential guest information is missing." Murmurs spread instantly through the ballroom like sparks across dry grass. A few investors stepped backward. Phones slowly lifted into the air. Someone whispered the word, "Thief." Another muttered, "Homeless guy." Emma looked up at the crowd with frightened confusion. Caleb remained still, quiet, dignified. One of the guards reached toward his arm. "Sir, don't make this difficult." Caleb slowly raised both hands away from his daughter, careful and controlled. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said calmly. Victoria descended the staircase in slow measured steps, her heels clicking sharply against polished marble. "Funny," she replied coolly. "Because trouble seems to follow people who don't belong in rooms like this." A few uncomfortable laughs escaped the crowd. Emma's face lowered toward the floor. Caleb noticed immediately. That hurt him far more than the accusation itself. He gently removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders even as security closed in around him. The room buzzed with tension now, thick and electric beneath the soft violin music still playing near the stage. Then came the sound that changed everything. Police sirens outside. Quiet at first, then closer. Victoria folded her arms. "Good," she said. "The cops are here." Emma suddenly looked up in panic. "Please don't take my dad," she whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Silence flickered briefly through the ballroom. Caleb rested one hand softly on her shoulder. "Look at me, Emma," he said gently. "You remember what I told you?" She nodded weakly through tears. "Good people stay calm." Caleb gave her a faint smile. "That's right." Seconds later, the ballroom doors opened and two city police officers stepped inside beneath the flashing red and blue lights pouring across the marble floor. And while the entire room watched Caleb Ward like he was a criminal, one older police captain near the entrance suddenly stopped walking altogether. Because the moment he saw the quiet single father standing beside that little girl, recognition flashed across his face like lightning before a storm. The ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers as the older police captain stepped through the entrance and stopped dead in his tracks. The flashing red and blue lights from outside reflected faintly across the polished marble floor, while soft violin music continued awkwardly near the stage, like the room itself had not yet realized something had shifted. Captain Daniel Alvarez had spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement, and in all those years he had learned to trust one thing above everything else: instinct. And right now, every instinct he had was telling him the quiet man standing beside that frightened little girl was not the threat everyone believed he was. One of the younger officers moved toward Caleb immediately. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Caleb nodded once. "Calm." Measured. Of course. No resistance. No panic. No raised voice. Emma clutched his hand tighter as tears slid silently down her cheeks. "Daddy, are they taking you away?" she whispered. Caleb crouched beside her again despite the dozens of eyes watching him. "Listen to me carefully," he said softly. "You stay brave, okay?" She tried to nod, but her lower lip trembled too hard. Around them, wealthy guests murmured behind champagne glasses and designer suits. Some stared with judgment, others with curiosity. A few quietly recorded everything on their phones. Victoria Sterling remained near the staircase, arms folded tightly across her chest, every inch of her posture radiating control. But something about the older captain's expression unsettled her. Alvarez was not looking at Caleb like a criminal. He was studying him like a memory he could not quite place. "Captain," one officer asked quietly. Alvarez did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted lower for only a second and landed on Caleb's hands. Steady hands. Scarred hands. Not the hands of a desperate thief. Then he noticed something else. Caleb never once positioned himself for escape. Instead, every subtle movement placed Emma farther from the officers and closer to safety. Protective instinct. Controlled awareness. Training. "Sir," the younger officer repeated more firmly. "We received reports that confidential access areas were breached." Caleb slowly rose to his feet. "I understand." Victoria stepped forward then, heels clicking sharply against marble. "There are investors in this room worth billions of dollars," she said coldly. "If sensitive company information was compromised tonight, I expect immediate action." The younger officers nodded quickly, eager to impress. But Alvarez remained silent. His gaze narrowed slightly as he watched Caleb scan the ballroom once more. Entrances. Cameras. Blind corners. It lasted less than a second, but trained eyes noticed trained behavior. "Interesting," Alvarez murmured under his breath. "What was that?" Victoria asked. Alvarez finally looked toward her. "Nothing yet." Emma suddenly stepped closer to Caleb's side. "My daddy did not steal anything," she said through tears. Her small voice echoed far louder than she intended inside the suddenly quiet ballroom. Several guests looked away uncomfortably. Caleb rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "Emma." "No," she whispered shakily. "They are being mean to you." The room seemed to shrink around those words. Mean. Not dangerous. Not criminal. Just mean. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly, but before she could speak again, one of the younger officers returned holding a slim black messenger bag. "Found this near the executive hallway," he announced. "It belongs to him." Every eye in the ballroom locked onto the bag instantly. The officer carefully opened it while cameras lifted higher throughout the room. A laptop. A folder. A small worn photograph. Alvarez stepped forward slowly and picked up the photograph first. His expression changed immediately. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough for the color to leave his face. Because the man standing beside him in military uniform 15 years earlier was Caleb Ward. The ballroom no longer sounded the same after Captain Alvarez saw the photograph. The laughter was gone now. So were the smug whispers floating between champagne glasses only moments earlier. In their place sat a strange quiet tension beneath the chandeliers, like the entire room could feel something shifting without understanding what it was yet. Alvarez held the old photograph carefully between his fingers while his eyes stayed locked on Caleb Ward. 15 years earlier, that same face had stood inside a classified operations center overseas beside men whose names never appeared in newspapers and whose missions never officially existed. Back then, Caleb had looked younger, sharper around the jaw, wearing military fatigues beneath desert sunlight. But the eyes were identical. Calm. Watchful. The eyes of someone who had seen too much and survived anyway. "Where did you get this?" one of the younger officers asked as he glanced toward the photograph. Alvarez ignored him. His breathing slowed slightly while pieces of memory settled into place. He remembered whispered conversations between federal task forces. Stories that moved quietly through law enforcement circles like ghost legends. A man called in when situations became impossible. A commander who disappeared before medals could be handed out publicly. Most people assumed those stories were exaggerated. Standing here now, Alvarez suddenly realized they had probably been understated. Victoria Sterling stepped closer, impatience sharpening her voice. "Captain, I asked for this handled immediately." Alvarez finally turned toward her. "Miss Sterling," he said carefully, How exactly did this man end up at your event tonight? Her expression hardened. He was working a private delivery contract. Caleb remained silent beside Emma, his hand still resting gently against her shoulder. Victoria continued. One of our vendors said he was reliable. Then security reported unauthorized movement near restricted executive offices. Unauthorized movement, Alvarez repeated slowly. Yes. Caleb looked toward the captain calmly. My daughter got lost looking for the restroom, he explained quietly. I followed her. Emma lowered her eyes guiltily. I thought the hallway had the bathrooms, she whispered. The younger officer frowned. That still does not explain the confidential floor access. Caleb nodded once. Because I never accessed it. Victoria exhaled sharply. Convenient answer. But Alvarez was no longer listening to her tone. He was watching Caleb instead. Specifically the way he spoke. No defensiveness. No desperation. Just measured facts. Most guilty people talked too much when fear entered the room. Caleb spoke like a man who had spent years controlling fear instead of obeying it. Nearby guests continued pretending not to stare while soft jazz drifted awkwardly from the ballroom speakers. Outside the towering glass windows, rain had begun falling over downtown Chicago, streaking silver lines across the city lights. Emma quietly wiped tears from her cheeks with the sleeve of Caleb's oversized coat. Then she looked up at the captain. My daddy always tells me honest people do not have to yell, she said softly. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Even Victoria looked away briefly. Alvarez studied the child for a moment before slowly handing the photograph back to Caleb. You served? He asked quietly. Caleb nodded once. A long time ago. Army. A pause. Something close to that. The younger officer scoffed faintly under his breath. Everybody claims military when they get caught. But Alvarez did not laugh. Because there was one detail he could not stop noticing. Throughout the entire confrontation, Caleb never once asked what evidence they had against him. He only stayed focused on Emma. Her comfort. Her fear. Her safety. It was not the behavior of a cornered criminal. It was the behavior of a protector. Victoria folded her arms tighter. Captain, with respect, I do not care about old photographs or military stories. My company data may have been compromised. Alvarez slowly looked back toward her. And if it was not? Victoria hesitated for the first time that evening. Only 1 second, but long enough for Caleb to notice. Then suddenly another member of Sterling security rushed into the ballroom, holding a tablet in both hands, his face pale beneath the ballroom lights. Miss Sterling, he said breathlessly, we found the breach. The room turned silent again. It was not him. The words hung in the ballroom like thunder after lightning. It was not him. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Rain continued sliding down the towering glass windows overlooking downtown Chicago, while the soft jazz music near the stage suddenly felt painfully out of place. Victoria Sterling stared at her head of security with visible disbelief. What do you mean it was not him? The security officer swallowed hard and held up the tablet with shaking hands. The breach came from an internal executive login 23 minutes before Mr. Ward entered the restricted hallway. Murmurs spread instantly through the crowd again, but this time the sound was different. Less judgment. More uncertainty. Victoria stepped forward sharply. That is impossible. We checked twice, the man answered nervously. The access credentials belong to someone already inside the executive network. Captain Alvarez slowly folded his arms while watching Victoria carefully now instead of Caleb. So your suspect was never actually connected to the breach. Victoria's jaw tightened. He was still in a restricted area. Caleb finally spoke again, calm as ever. Looking for my daughter. Emma stood quietly beside him, clutching his coat around her small shoulders, while several guests nearby avoided eye contact entirely. Just minutes earlier they had watched the scene like entertainment. Now embarrassment crept slowly across expensive faces beneath the ballroom lights. One investor quietly lowered his phone. Another cleared his throat awkwardly and stepped away from the crowd. Dignity has a strange way of exposing people when the truth enters a room. Victoria looked toward Caleb with frustration simmering beneath her controlled exterior. You expect me to believe this is all some misunderstanding? Caleb met her gaze evenly. I expect nothing. That answer unsettled her more than anger would have. Because angry people were easy to predict. Hurt people were easy to manage. But calm men with nothing to prove were dangerous in a different way. Victoria had spent most of her adult life building walls around herself inside boardrooms filled with sharks wearing tailored suits. She trusted contracts more than promises, data more than emotions. Ever since her former business partner betrayed her company years earlier, she had stopped believing kindness belonged anywhere near power. And standing before her now was a man who looked poor, worn down, ordinary on the surface, yet somehow completely untouched by the humiliation she had thrown at him. That bothered her deeply. Captain Alvarez glanced toward the younger officers. "Remove the cuffs." But Captain, one, protested quietly. He was still identified by security. Alvarez's voice hardened slightly. "Remove them." The metallic click echoed softly through the ballroom as the restraints came off Caleb's wrists. Emma immediately grabbed his hand with visible relief. Caleb simply rubbed the faint red marks once and said nothing. No outrage, no speech, no revenge, just silence. The kind of silence that makes guilty people uncomfortable. Victoria looked around the ballroom and suddenly realized the room was no longer standing with her. People were watching her now, judging her, measuring her. A billionaire chief executive who had publicly accused a single father before confirming the facts. Her face remained composed, but inside, something small and unfamiliar began pressing against the armor she wore so carefully. Shame. Then Captain Alvarez looked toward Caleb again. "Mr. Ward," he said slowly, "I think perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere quieter." Caleb nodded once. "That would probably be best for my daughter." Emma looked exhausted now, her eyes heavy from fear and confusion. Alvarez softened slightly when he looked at her. "There is a private lounge upstairs. Safer there." Victoria hesitated. "Captain, this matter concerns my company." Alvarez turned toward her carefully. "And right now, Miss Sterling, I think there is far more happening here than a simple security misunderstanding." Before Victoria could answer, one of the ballroom staff members rushed toward them carrying a folded document. "Miss Sterling," he said nervously, "this was delivered for Mr. Ward earlier tonight." Caleb frowned slightly as the envelope was handed over. Heavy cream paper. No return address. Only 3 words written across the front in black ink. "He never told you." The moment Caleb saw the handwriting, something changed in his eyes for the very first time that night. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The private executive lounge upstairs overlooked the entire Chicago skyline through towering glass walls streaked with rain. Far below, traffic lights glowed red and gold across wet streets, while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the city. Inside the lounge, however, the silence felt heavier than the storm outside. Emma sat curled quietly on a leather couch beneath Caleb's oversized coat, while a hotel employee brought her hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. The little girl wrapped both hands around the warm cup as if it were the only steady thing left in the world. Caleb stood near the windows holding the mysterious envelope in one hand without opening it yet. Captain Alvarez remained a few feet away, watching him carefully. Victoria Sterling entered moments later, still carrying herself with practiced composure, though the cracks beneath it were becoming harder to hide. "I want to know what is happening," she said firmly. Caleb did not answer immediately. He simply stared at the rain sliding down the glass. "So do I." Victoria folded her arms. "That envelope clearly means something to you." Caleb finally looked down at the handwriting again. Slow, controlled, familiar. The kind of handwriting tied to memories a person spends years trying to bury. Emma glanced toward him nervously. "Daddy." Caleb softened instantly when he heard her voice. "I am okay, sweetheart." But Alvarez noticed something important. Caleb had not said everything was okay, only that he was. There was a difference. Victoria stepped closer. "If someone targeted my company tonight, I deserve answers." Caleb gave a faint nod. "You deserve truth," he said quietly, "not assumptions." The words landed harder than Victoria expected, because assumptions were exactly what she had built the entire night upon. She turned away briefly toward the city lights beyond the glass. Somewhere deep down, beneath years of boardroom battles and public expectations, embarrassment had started turning into something worse. Regret. She hated that feeling. Hated how quickly it weakened people. Hated how it reminded her of the years after her mother died, when every mistake inside the Sterling Empire became national headlines. Her father had taught her early that survival required distance, control, certainty. Never let emotions make decisions. Never trust appearances. And tonight she had broken her own rules by reacting emotionally the moment she saw Caleb near the executive hallway. The realization irritated her deeply. Captain Alvarez cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Ward," he said carefully, "I think it is time you tell us who might have sent that." Caleb remained silent for several seconds. Then finally he opened the envelope. Inside rested a single folded piece of paper. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Just one sentence typed across the center. "She still does not remember the fire." Victoria frowned immediately. What does that mean? But Caleb's expression had already changed again. Not fear this time. Pain. Old pain. The kind buried so deeply it reshapes a person long before they realize it. Emma noticed instantly. "Daddy?" she whispered again. Caleb carefully folded the paper back together before answering. "It means someone from my past knows I am here." Alvarez stepped forward slowly. "Military?" Caleb nodded once. "Something like that." Victoria exhaled impatiently. "You keep speaking in riddles." Caleb looked toward her calmly. "Because some truths destroy lives when spoken carelessly." Before Victoria could respond, a soft knock interrupted the room. One of Sterling's senior assistants entered nervously holding a tablet. "Miss Sterling," she said quietly, "your father just landed." Victoria straightened immediately. "My father is in Chicago?" "Yes, ma'am. His plane arrived 20 minutes ago." A strange silence followed those words. Because Senator Richard Sterling almost never attended company events personally anymore. Not after his health declined the previous year. Victoria looked genuinely confused now. Why would he come here without telling me? But before anyone could answer, Captain Alvarez noticed something else entirely. For the first time all evening, Caleb Ward looked unsettled. Not frightened. Not angry. Just tired. Deeply tired. Like a man realizing the past he spent years outrunning had finally caught up to him beneath the soft lights of a billionaire's ballroom. The rain outside had grown heavier by the time the elevator doors opened at the far end of the executive floor. Soft thunder rolled beyond the skyline, while warm golden lights reflected across polished black marble inside. The Sterling Tower Lounge. Every person in the room turned instinctively toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Senator Richard Sterling entered slowly beside two security agents, his silver hair neatly combed, his dark overcoat damp from the storm outside. Age had thinned him over the years, but power still followed him into rooms before he even spoke. Victoria straightened immediately. "Dad." Genuine surprise crossed her face for the first time all evening. "What are you doing here?" The senator did not answer her right away. His eyes had already landed on Caleb Ward. And the moment they did, the air inside the lounge changed completely. Captain Alvarez noticed it first. Not tension. Recognition. Deep recognition. The kind built from history too serious to explain casually. Caleb stood motionless near the windows, one hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. The senator finally removed his gloves slowly, his tired eyes never leaving Caleb's face. "You disappeared," he said quietly. Caleb gave a faint nod. That was the idea. Victoria looked between them in visible confusion. "You know him?" The senator exhaled slowly, almost sadly. "Better than you realize." Silence settled across the room again. Even Emma sensed something important unfolding now. She quietly lowered her cup of hot chocolate and leaned closer against her father's side. Victoria took a step forward. "Dad, what is going on?" Richard Sterling looked toward his daughter carefully, as though weighing how much truth she was ready to carry. "Years ago," he said slowly, "before your company existed, before the Senate, before any of this, there was an incident overseas involving diplomatic personnel." Caleb lowered his eyes slightly. The senator continued. "Your name was attached to that trip." Victoria frowned faintly. "I was 16. "Yes," he answered softly, "and very nearly did not come home." The room fell completely silent. Captain Alvarez felt chills move through him despite the warmth of the lounge. Victoria stared at her father in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" The senator looked back toward Caleb. "He never told you." Caleb's voice remained calm. There was nothing to tell. Victoria shook her head slowly. "No. Stop speaking in fragments. Somebody explain this." Richard Sterling moved closer now, his expression heavy with old memory. "The convoy carrying your delegation was trapped during a political evacuation," he said quietly. "Communications failed. Security teams lost contact for nearly 6 hours. Victoria's face slowly lost color. Something distant flickered behind her eyes. Fragments. Heat. Smoke. Fear. A child's memory buried beneath years of trauma and carefully managed silence. I remember a fire, she whispered faintly. Caleb looked away toward the rain outside. The senator nodded once. Most of your memory was suppressed afterward. Doctors said it was safer that way. Victoria stared at Caleb now with growing disbelief. You were there? Caleb remained quiet for several seconds before answering. Yes. Who were you? Another pause. Then finally, Captain Alvarez watched the quiet single father speak words that seemed almost too heavy for the room itself. I led the extraction team. No one moved. No one even blinked. Emma looked up at her father with confusion. Daddy. Caleb gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. It was a long time ago, sweetheart. But Victoria could no longer look away from him. Her breathing had changed now, uneven beneath the controlled mask she wore so carefully in public. Somewhere deep inside her mind, forgotten pieces were beginning to reconnect. A pair of steady arms carrying her through smoke. A calm voice telling her to keep her eyes closed. A military jacket wrapped around her shoulders while alarms screamed somewhere in the distance. And suddenly the sentence from the envelope no longer sounded mysterious at all. She still does not remember the fire. Because someone out there knew exactly who Caleb Ward truly was. The storm outside seemed quieter after the truth entered the room. Rain still traced silver lines across the glass walls of the executive lounge. But inside Sterling Tower, nobody cared about the weather anymore. Victoria Sterling stood completely still beneath the warm overhead lights, staring at Caleb Ward as though seeing him for the first time. The elegant confidence she carried into every boardroom had vanished somewhere between the words extraction team and fire. Pieces of memory continued surfacing inside her mind now, whether she wanted them to or not. Smoke filling narrow hallways. A frightened teenage girl unable to breathe through panic. Strong hands guiding her forward while alarms screamed overhead. A calm voice repeating the same words again and again. Stay with me. Just keep walking. Victoria pressed a hand lightly against the edge of the table beside her, as if the room itself had shifted beneath her feet. You saved me, she whispered. Caleb looked down briefly instead of answering. A lot of people were involved. No, Senator Sterling said quietly. You brought her home. Silence settled heavily across the lounge. Emma looked between the adults in confusion before tugging gently on Caleb's sleeve. Daddy, you were a hero? Caleb knelt beside her slowly, his expression softening instantly despite the weight hanging in the room. No, sweetheart, he said gently. I was just doing my job. Captain Alvarez watched that moment carefully. That answer told him more about Caleb Ward than any classified file ever could. Most people spent their lives chasing recognition. Caleb avoided it even when he deserved it. Victoria stared at him with growing disbelief and shame twisting together inside her chest. Earlier that night, she had publicly humiliated the very man who once carried her through the worst moment of her life. She remembered the fear in Emma's eyes downstairs. The whispers. The accusations. The security guards surrounding them beneath hundreds of watching strangers. And through all of it, Caleb never once exposed who he truly was to protect himself. He simply endured it quietly for his daughter's sake. That realization hurt more than any public embarrassment ever could. Why did you never tell anyone? Victoria asked softly. Caleb rose slowly to his feet again. Because some people survive things they deserve to forget. The senator lowered his eyes at those words. He understood them too well. For years his family buried that overseas incident beneath politics, security reports, and carefully managed public narratives. Victoria had been encouraged to move forward without reopening the trauma. Caleb had disappeared into silence afterward. Different lives, different worlds. Yet somehow fate had dragged them back into the same room beneath the same storm. Then suddenly the lounge television mounted near the bar flickered with a breaking news alert. One of Sterling Dynamics' senior executives appeared on the screen beside flashing headlines about a corporate cyber investigation. Victoria frowned immediately. What is this? Her assistant quickly grabbed the remote and raised the volume. Federal investigators confirmed tonight that an internal executive from Sterling Dynamics is under investigation for attempting to sell proprietary defense software to overseas buyers. The room went cold. Captain Alvarez looked sharply toward the screen. Defense software? Victoria's face drained of color. That project is classified. The news anchor continued speaking while stock footage of Sterling headquarters played across the screen. Sources close to the investigation claim anonymous evidence submitted earlier this evening triggered the federal inquiry. Victoria slowly turned toward Caleb. Anonymous evidence. Caleb remained calm beside the windows. Too calm. Then Alvarez suddenly understood something that made his stomach tighten. You already knew, the captain said quietly. Caleb did not answer immediately. Emma looked up at him curiously while rain tapped softly against the glass behind them. Finally, Caleb spoke. I delivered the evidence package to federal authorities 3 days ago. Complete silence followed. Victoria stared at him in shock. You were investigating my company? No, Caleb answered evenly. I was protecting innocent people from someone inside it. Senator Sterling looked at Caleb carefully now, old respect returning visibly to his tired face. You came here tonight knowing this would happen. Caleb nodded once. I hoped it would not happen in front of my daughter. Those words shattered something inside Victoria completely, because for the first time that evening, she realized the strongest person in the room was never the billionaire surrounded by power. It was the quiet single father who had every reason to expose, embarrass, or destroy people tonight, and still chose dignity instead. The city below Sterling Tower glowed through sheets of rain, while silence lingered heavily inside the executive lounge. Nobody seemed to know what to say after Caleb's confession. The television continued flashing headlines about the federal investigation into Sterling Dynamics, but no one was watching it anymore. All attention remained fixed on the quiet single father standing beside the windows with his daughter close against him. Victoria Sterling slowly lowered herself into one of the leather chairs near the conference table, her composure unraveling piece by piece beneath the soft golden lights. For years she had built her reputation on reading people quickly. Investors, politicians, competitors. Weakness usually revealed itself within minutes. Yet somehow she had looked directly at Caleb Ward tonight and understood absolutely nothing about him. She remembered the way security surrounded him downstairs. The humiliation, the whispers, the fear in Emma's eyes. And through all of it, Caleb had protected everyone in the room except himself. That realization sat painfully inside her chest now. Senator Sterling finally spoke quietly into the silence. The investigation will destroy several careers before morning. Caleb nodded once. Probably. And yet you still tried to handle it privately. Children were at the gala tonight, Caleb answered softly. Families, staff, innocent people. Public chaos helps nobody. Captain Alvarez shook his head slowly in disbelief. Most men in your position would have exposed everything immediately after what happened downstairs. Caleb glanced toward Emma. My daughter has already seen enough fear for one evening. Emma looked up at him with tired eyes while clutching the empty mug of hot chocolate against her chest. Victoria watched the small interaction quietly, and for the first time in many years, something unfamiliar pressed against the carefully protected walls around her heart. Not attraction, not admiration. Something deeper. Respect. Genuine respect. The kind earned slowly through character instead of power. She stood again after a long moment and walked carefully toward Caleb. Her heels no longer sounded sharp against the marble floor. Softer now somehow. Human. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. Caleb looked at her calmly, but said nothing. Victoria swallowed hard before continuing. Not because of who you are, and not because of what you did for my family years ago. Her voice wavered slightly. Because I treated you like your dignity depended on your bank account. The rain tapped softly against the windows behind them while the room remained completely still. Caleb finally answered in the same calm tone he had carried all evening. Fear makes people cruel sometimes. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly. That does not excuse me. Emma suddenly stepped away from Caleb and looked up at Victoria carefully. My daddy says people can say sorry if they mean it. The innocence in her voice nearly broke the room apart. Victoria knelt slowly in front of the little girl, emotion finally visible beneath her polished exterior. Your father raised you very well. Emma looked back toward Caleb proudly. He makes pancakes shaped like stars on Saturdays. A faint smile touched Caleb's face for the first time all night. Even Captain Alvarez quietly smiled at that. The senator looked toward Caleb again, his voice softer now. You could have asked for anything after what happened overseas. Recognition, position, money. Caleb shook his head gently. I asked for anonymity. Why? Alvarez asked quietly. Caleb looked toward the skyline for several seconds before answering. Because eventually I learned something important. The room waited silently. The people who survive the hardest things usually do not want applause, he said. They want peace. Those words settled over everyone like snowfall. Victoria felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes, though she fought hard to hide them. For years she chased control because she believed power created safety. Yet the safest person in the room had turned out to be the man with the least interest in power at all. Then Caleb gently placed his hand on Emma's shoulder. We should go. Victoria looked up quickly. Wait. Caleb paused. Please, she said softly this time. No authority. No command. Just sincerity. Before you leave, let me make this right. Caleb studied her quietly while thunder rolled faintly over Chicago in the distance. And for the first time that night, Victoria Sterling truly hoped the quiet man she had humiliated would give her a second chance she probably did not deserve. An hour later, the ballroom downstairs looked completely different from the place that had humiliated Caleb Ward earlier that evening. The orchestra had stopped playing. Most of the investors remained quietly gathered beneath the chandeliers, while rain continued falling outside the towering windows of Sterling Tower. News of the federal investigation had spread quickly through the room, replacing gossip with uneasy silence. Waiters moved carefully between tables now, their polished shoes whispering across marble floors while television crews waited beyond the lobby downstairs. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered about the single father in the worn brown jacket. Victoria Sterling stood alone near the center stage, staring out across the ballroom she had controlled so confidently only hours earlier. But tonight control felt meaningless. She had spent years believing power protected people from humiliation, fear, and betrayal. Yet the man she publicly accused possessed none of her wealth and carried more dignity than anyone else in the building. Captain Alvarez stood quietly near the back of the room beside Senator Sterling while security teams coordinated with federal agents upstairs. Emma sat near the dessert table eating a slice of chocolate cake someone from the kitchen had brought her. The little girl looked much happier now, though every few seconds she still glanced around the ballroom searching for her father. Caleb remained near the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, calm as ever despite dozens of eyes turning toward him with growing respect. Then Victoria finally stepped toward the microphone at center stage. The ballroom slowly quieted completely. She took a slow breath before speaking. Tonight, she began softly, I made a mistake. The honesty in her voice surprised everyone immediately. Victoria Sterling was famous for strength, precision, certainty. Public vulnerability was something she almost never allowed herself. Yet tonight there was no trace of the cold executive from earlier. Only a woman confronting the weight of her own failure. A good man was humiliated in this room because I chose suspicion over compassion, she continued. And I allowed fear to blind me to character. No phones lifted now. No one interrupted. Even the rain outside seemed quieter somehow. Victoria looked toward Caleb, standing near the ballroom doors. Mr. Ward, she said carefully, you protected this company from corruption before anyone else understood the danger. And despite the way you were treated tonight, you still chose integrity. Caleb lowered his eyes briefly, uncomfortable with attention. Victoria continued more softly now. Years ago, you saved my life. Tonight, you reminded me how easy it is to lose your humanity while protecting your success. The room remained completely still. Some guests looked ashamed, others emotional. Captain Alvarez simply nodded slowly to himself. Because moments like this were rare. Real accountability. Real grace. Victoria stepped down from the stage after a long silence and walked directly toward Caleb. Every eye followed her. When she stopped in front of him, her voice dropped low enough that only a few nearby people could hear. I am truly sorry. Caleb studied her quietly for several seconds. The ballroom waited. Then finally he gave a small nod. Thank you. No dramatic speech. No revenge. No humiliation returned. Just dignity. Quiet dignity. Emma suddenly ran across the ballroom toward Caleb and wrapped both arms around his waist. Can we go home now? She asked sleepily. Caleb smiled softly and brushed her hair back from her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. I think we can. Victoria looked down at the little girl before carefully removing her own expensive cashmere coat and placing it gently over Emma's shoulders beside Caleb's old jacket. Emma blinked up at her. "Thank you." Victoria managed a small emotional smile. "You are welcome." Caleb adjusted the coat around his daughter carefully, then looked once more across the silent ballroom. Hours earlier, those same people had watched him like he did not belong there. Now nobody could meet his eyes for very long. Not because of fear, because of respect. Caleb took Emma's hand and started walking toward the exit beneath the warm chandelier lights, while rain shimmered beyond the glass walls of the city. No cameras flashed. No applause followed him. Yet one by one, people throughout the ballroom slowly stood as he passed. Investors, waiters, police officers, executives. Complete silence filled the room while the quiet single father and his daughter disappeared into the storm beyond the doors. And somehow that silence said more than words ever could.